They laughed at him. They said a loudmouth black kid from Louisville had no business believing he could become champion of the world. He was the Olympic gold medalist, sure, but that was amateur boxing. This was the real prize, the heavyweight championship, and everyone knew how that story would end. The brash contender with the big mouth would be taught a brutal lesson. He'd be humiliated in front of the whole world, put back in his place as a warning to anyone like him daring to step out of line. The whispers started long before the fight was even signed. He's fast, they said, but just wait until he gets hit for real. Wait until he faces pressure he can't dance away from. Wait until he stands across from Sonny Liston, the scariest man in boxing. Cassius Clay may have been an Olympic hero, but Liston was something else entirely. He was the heavyweight champion, a bear of a man with fists like sledgehammers and a glare that could freeze your soul. Liston had terrorized the division, flattening former champions in one round. He was the inevitable executioner waiting at the gallows. And here was this 22-year-old, all fancy talk and poems, practically volunteering for his own destruction. Veteran boxing writers chuckled and shook their heads. Of the 46 journalists covering the fight, 43 confidently predicted Clay would be destroyed. Some called it a public execution in waiting. Others joked the Louisville Lip might not survive one round. Even those who didn't like Sonny Liston found themselves rooting for him to shut this kid up. That's how much Cassius Clay's audacity rankled the establishment. A black man in 1964 was expected to be modest, grateful, deferential, like Joe Louis before him, who always behaved just the way white America felt comfortable. But this kid, he was different. He was loud. He bragged about how pretty he was, how great he was. He recited goofy poems predicting his victory. He refused to act afraid. It was outrageous, unthinkable. And for that, they wanted him broken. What none of them understood, what none of them could understand, was that behind the loud mouth was a young man who had already been forged in fires of pressure they knew nothing about. Cassius Clay grew up in a world that tried to break you before you even began. He was born in 1942 in segregated Louisville, Kentucky, only 80-odd years after slavery had ended on paper, in a country still drowning in racism. In young Cassius's world, there were places he couldn't go, things he couldn't do, simply because of the color of his skin. Signs on restaurant doors said no coloreds. Buses had seats he couldn't sit in. From the moment he could understand words, the world was telling him, know your place. As a child, Cassius saw firsthand what could happen if a black person didn't stay in that place. When he was just 13, he heard about Emmett Till, a 14-year-old black boy not much older than Cassius, lynched horrifically in Mississippi for allegedly whistling at a white woman. The story and the image of Emmett's mutilated face in the news left Cassius shaken and angry. It was a brutal reminder of the ever-present threat looming over black youth. Step out of line, even a little, and the system will come for you. Fear was real and justified in those days, but Cassius decided early on that he would not live in fear. He would find a way to stand up tall in a world that wanted him cowering. That resolve found its focus when Cassius was 12 years old, thanks to a stolen bicycle. It was a red Schwinn bike, his pride and joy, and one day it was stolen right off the street. Young Cassius was livid. He was stomping mad and ready to fight. He reported the theft to a police officer at a local recreation center, vowing to whip whoever took his bike. The officer was a man named Joe Martin, who also happened to run a boxing gym in the basement. Martin looked at the skinny, furious kid and saw an opportunity. He told Cassius bluntly, "Well, you better learn to fight before you go up anybody." And with that, he invited the boy to come train. Cassius showed up to that gym and never looked back. Boxing became the outlet for all his pent-up frustration and ambition. He trained like a boy possessed, waking up early to run miles through Louisville's streets, raining sweat and punches in a dilapidated local gym, practicing his footwork religiously. He was quick, and he wanted to be quicker. He was strong for his size, and he wanted to be stronger. And above all, he loved to talk. Even as a kid, throwing his first jabs, Cassius bragged to anyone who would listen that he'd be the greatest someday. That brashness rubs him the wrong way even then. One local boxing show host nicknamed him Cash the Brat for his cocky attitude. But Cassius didn't care. He knew that in a fair fight, his fist could make him equal to any man. As a teen, he started piling up amateur trophies. He won Golden Gloves titles and national amateur championships with a flashy style that combined lightning speed and endless confidence. If an opponent dared to hit him, Cassius would dance away, sticking out his chin mockingly before peppering the guy with a blur of punches. He made boxing look fun, almost easy, and that infuriated some old-timers who thought he was too showy. But he kept winning. By 18, Cassius Clay had become one of the best amateur fighters in the country, earning himself a spot on the 1960 U.S. Olympic team. Going to Rome for the Olympics was the first time Cassius left the country, the first time he'd ever fly in an airplane. He was so afraid of flying that he nearly refused to go. Legend has it he only boarded the plane after securing a parachute to wear just in case. That's the thing about Cassius. He felt fear like anyone else, but he refused to let it stop him from doing what he set out to do. In Rome, under the bright Olympic spotlight, the teenager from Louisville dazzled the world. He fought his way to the light heavyweight gold medal, outpointing opponents from Europe, the Soviet Union, and elsewhere. On the podium, listening to the Star-Spangled Banner, Cassius Clay stood proud with the gold around his neck, thinking that maybe, just maybe, this would finally earn him the respect back home that he deserved. But back home, all had changed. One story, perhaps embellished over time, but one Ollie himself told, illustrates the cold reality. After returning from the Olympics, Cassius went into a local diner with his gold medal still proudly hung around his neck. He had just fought for his country and won. Yet when he sat down to order, the staff told him, "We don't serve Negroes here." Olympic champion or not, he was just another black man to them. Cassius left that diner fuming. According to his tale, he walked to the nearby Ohio River, looked at the gold medal that he had thought meant something, and hurled it into the water. Whether that part of the story is fact or myth, its truth lived in his heart. America might have been happy to use him as a symbol of national pride abroad, but at home, he was still expected to stay in his place. Cassius Clay wasn't about to accept that. By the time Cassius Clay stood on the brink of a heavyweight title shot in early 1964, he was more than just a loud challenger. He was a young black man who carried a whole lot of history and hunger into the ring with him. He wasn't just fighting for a boxing crown. He was fighting an entire notion of how a black man was supposed to behave. He was fighting to prove something to everyone back home who'd ever tried to put him down. He was fighting for respect that had long been denied. And that fight would soon come to a head against Sonny Liston. As the fight drew near, the hype and tension reached a fever pitch. In Miami, where the bout would take place, Liston trained with a quiet menace while Clay made sure everyone heard him. He'd show up at Liston's public workouts to heckle him. He called the champion a big, ugly bear, promised to send him into retirement, even poetically predicted, "Liston in 8." The press ate it up, laughing at Clay's antics as if it were all a sideshow. Surely he was just selling tickets, try to hide his fear behind that mouth. Surely, when the moment came, he'd get what was coming to him. Liston, with his mob connections and ex-con aura, was accustomed to opponents trembling in fear. But Clay was doing something Liston had never encountered: psychological warfare. He taunted Liston mercilessly to his face and through the cameras, poking at the champ's pride. One night, Clay even drove a bus full of his supporters to Liston's quiet neighborhood at 3 a.m., shouting challenges with a bullhorn until Liston, furious, reportedly fired a gun into the air to scare him off. The message was clear. Clay wasn't going to be intimidated. He was turning the tables, making Liston feel hunted, unsettled, maybe even afraid. By fight week, the atmosphere was electric and poisonous all at once. The bookmakers had Clay as a 7, to one underdog. Newspapers ran cartoons of Cassius Clay getting smashed like a bug. Many fans genuinely feared for the cocky youngster's safety. The champion himself grew to hate Clay's guts. How dare this punk make a mockery of him? Liston growled that he'd teach the kid a lesson in pain. It all seemed to be building toward an inevitable, ugly conclusion. The morning of the fight, at the official weigh-in, things nearly went off the rails. Clay showed up shouting, completely unhinged, or so it appeared. He hollered insults at Liston in front of the cameras. Someone's going to die at ringside tonight. His handlers struggled to hold him back as he lunged and ranted. Reporters in the room couldn't believe it. Was this an act, or had the pressure finally cracked Cassius Clay's mind? A doctor checked Clay's pulse, 120 beats per minute, more than double his normal resting rate. Everyone nodded knowingly. The kid was terrified. Maybe he was trying to psyche himself up, or maybe he was truly losing it. There were even rumors Clay might not show up to the fight at all. The consensus was that fear had finally caught up to the Louisville loudmouth, and reality was about to hit like a freight train. But what those onlookers didn't realize is that Clay knew exactly what he was doing. Every bit of it, the boasts, the crazed antics, the wild glint in his eye, serve a purpose. He was a showman, yes, but also a strategist. While Liston and the world thought they were witnessing a clown on the verge of panic, Clay was scripting a drama that only he understood. He later admitted as much. He'd acted crazy to make Liston think he was unhinged, to throw the big man off his game. It was, in its own bizarre way, a calculated performance designed to turn the tables one more time. He wanted Liston angry, overconfident, and already mentally defeated by the time they stepped into the ring. When the night finally arrived, more than 8,000 fans packed the Miami Beach Convention Center, buzzing with anticipation. Under those hot lights, as Cassius Clay and Sonny Liston glared at each other in the center of the ring, it felt like the climax of a heavyweight grudge drama unlike any boxing had ever seen. On one side stood Liston, the champion, the enforcer of boxing's natural order, a 218-pound scowl and black trunks. On the other, Clay, the challenger, practically bouncing on his toes in a white robe, soaking in the moment he'd predicted for months. The air was thick with cigar smoke, tension, and the thirst for spectacle. Everyone had come to see one of two things. Either Clay silenced in violent fashion, or, in the slim possibility almost no one dared entertain, history being made by the brash kid who had talked his way into this fight. The opening bell rang. What happened next would shock everyone in that arena, and soon the entire world. From the first round, it was clear this was not going to be the slaughter everyone expected. Clay didn't run in fear, and Liston couldn't land the knockout punch he'd promised. Instead, the younger man danced, literally danced, around the champ, flicking quick jabs into Liston's face, then sliding away before the bear could grab him. Liston swung and missed again and again. Frustration flashed in the big man's eyes. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The loudmouth wasn't crumbling. He was outboxing the bully. In Clay's corner, trainer Angelo Dundee watched with a mix of excitement and concern. Clay was fighting brilliantly, but Liston was dangerous every second. A single punch could still turn everything upside down. And in the third round, Liston finally connected, a thudding left hook to Clay's jaw. The challenger felt the jolt, but he refused to go down. He later said Liston's punches were hard, sure, but not nearly as bad as everyone had warned. That was another shock. Liston's mystique of invincibility was cracking. As the rounds went on, the impossible started to seem possible. By round 4, Liston was breathing heavier, already looking a bit arm-weary from chasing this whip-it-fast opponent. The crowd, which had come expecting a quick execution, began to stir with surprise. Could Clay actually be winning? It was unthinkable, and yet right before their eyes, the fight's momentum was shifting. Then, suddenly, drama in Clay's corner. Between rounds 4 and 5, Clay returned to his stool, blinking furiously, pawing at his eyes. "I can't see," he yelled to Angelo Dundee. Something was wrong. His eyes were burning. Blinded, Clay panicked for a moment. Was it sweat? Or something more sinister? Dundee suspected foul play. Later, rumors swirled that Liston's corner had secretly applied ointment or liniment to the champ's gloves to impair Clay's vision. In that moment, none of that mattered. All Clay knew was that he was effectively blind as round 5 began, and Sonny Liston was coming for him. Liston pounced, throwing heavy blows at a suddenly vulnerable Clay. The challenger's eyes were stinging, his vision blurred. But some combination of muscle memory and sheer will kept him alive. Clay danced away, covered up, clinched when he had to, doing everything possible to survive. For nearly a full round, he fought on pure heart, evading Liston's wild swings by inches. It was the first real crisis of the fight, and for those watching, it was the opening they'd expected all along, the beginning of the end. Surely now Liston would land the finisher and shut this kid's mouth for good. But by the grace of luck or providence, Clay made it through round 5. Back in the corner, Dundee furiously rinsed his fighter's eyes with water, trying to clear whatever was burning them. Gradually, Clay's vision returned, and with it came a surge of determination. In the 6th round, he opened up, slinging punches with a new fury. Quick combinations lashed out, catching Liston flush. The champion's head snapped back from jabs and right hands that no one imagined Clay possessed. Liston looked stunned, not just by the blows, but by the audacity. This was the moment the whole power dynamic reversed. Sonny Liston, the stalker, became the stalked. The bully was getting beaten up by the very man he'd vowed to destroy. At the end of the 6th, Clay bounded back to his corner shouting, "He's done. I got him." He sensed what few had dared to dream. Liston was spent. The man who had struck fear into the boxing world for years slumped on his stool, breathing heavily, a cut under his eye, a bewildered look on his face. And when the bell rang for round 7, Sonny Liston, the great and fearsome champion, did not rise. He spit out his mouthpiece and quit on his stool, citing an injured shoulder. In that instant, the fight was over. For a heartbeat, there was silence, stunned, disbelieving silence. Then pandemonium. Cassius Clay leapt to the center of the ring, arms raised, screaming into the air. "I shook up the world. I shook up the world." Reporters and officials swarmed the canvas, wide-eyed in shock. Spectators were on their feet, some cheering madly, some just standing dumbstruck with mouths agape. It was the unthinkable outcome come to life. The brash challenger had not only survived, he had triumphed. Cassius Clay had become the heavyweight champion of the world. The arena crackled with chaos. Clay, now the victor, pranced around, yelling, "I am the greatest! I am the greatest!" reminding everyone that he'd predicted this all along. And many in that crowd and around the globe had to face a humbling truth. They had been utterly, magnificently wrong. The laughingstock had made them eat their laughter. The Louisville lip had backed up every boast. Almost immediately, the narrative flipped on its head. The 7-1 underdog had dethroned the most feared man in boxing. It was one of the greatest upsets in sports history. But beyond that, something deeper resonated. Black Americans rejoiced at seeing one of their own, who never bowed his head or bit his tongue, seize the crown. For them, Clay's victory was a joyous rebuttal to a society that always told them to stay in their place. To the old guard of sports writers who had dismissed him, it was a moment of reckoning. They would never underestimate him again. Yet even in his moment of triumph, the forces that belittled Cassius Clay were not done. In fact, they were about to double down. The very next morning, as the world grappled with the shock of his victory, Clay delivered another jolt. He confirmed the rumors that had been swirling. He was indeed a member of the Nation of Islam. He declared that henceforth he would no longer be known as Cassius Clay, which he called his slave name, but as Muhammad Ali, a name bestowed by the nation's leader, Elijah Muhammad. If Clay's victory had unsettled the establishment, His name change and religious stance felt like an earthquake. In 1964, openly aligning with the black Muslims was seen by white America as practically an act of defiance, if not outright hostility. The Nation of Islam was viewed by many as a radical, anti-white separatist movement, a threat to the status quo. And now, the heavyweight champion of the world was one of them. The backlash was immediate. Newspaper editors and TV newscasters flat out refused to call him Muhammad Ali. To them, he was Cassius Clay and would always be Cassius Clay. Many sports writers snidely insisted on using his old name, as if to punish his boldness. Overnight, one of the most coveted titles in sports, heavyweight champion, became entangled with America's racial and religious anxieties. In many white Americans' eyes, Ali went from an entertaining loudmouth to something more dangerous, a symbol of black resistance. Even some black Americans, those who didn't agree with the Nation of Islam's separatist creed, felt uneasy about his conversion. Through it all, Muhammad Ali stood defiant. He insisted people respect his new identity. "I don't have to be what you want me to be," he told reporters. "I'm free to be who I want to be." He had beaten Liston without anyone's permission, and he saw no reason to seek permission now for who he chose to be. For Ali, being heavyweight champion was about more than prize fights. It was a platform, and he intended to use it on his own terms. In the ring, Ali continued to prove his greatness. Over the next 3 years, he defended his title again and again, dispatching one challenger after another with the same dazzling speed and brash confidence. He outclassed former champions like Floyd Patterson and flattened tough contenders like Cleveland Williams. In 1967, he faced Ernie Terrell, a fighter who had taunted him by pointedly calling him Clay. Ali made Terrell pay a price. For 15 rounds, Ali punished him mercilessly, all the while taunting between punches, "What's my name? What's my name?" It was a chilling display. Ali wasn't just defeating opponents. He was demanding respect in the most visceral way. By the mid-1960s, Muhammad Ali was arguably the most famous athlete on the planet. But that fame was double-edged. To many in the civil rights movement, he was an inspiring yet complicated figure. A black man who had risen to the pinnacle of his sport without conceding an ounce of his pride, but whose separatist religious views didn't align with the integrated struggle Dr. King was leading. To the U.S. government, Ali's outspokenness and growing influence were a potential problem. The FBI watched him, collecting files on his contacts and speeches. He was a champion in a time of upheaval, when America was being forced to confront its own injustices, and when not even the heavyweight title could insulate a black man from controversy. And then came Vietnam. The war overseas was escalating, sending thousands of young American men, many of them black and poor, into the jungles of Southeast Asia. In early 1966, Muhammad Ali's draft status was revised, and he was summoned for induction into the U.S. Army. The expectation was that the heavyweight champion would put aside his personal beliefs and serve when called, or at least step aside quietly. But Muhammad Ali had never been one to do as expected. He stunned the nation by flat-out refusing to serve. On April 28, 1967, in Houston, Ali reported for the draft as ordered, and when his name was called, he would not step forward. He would not raise his hand. He would not take the oath. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," he said bluntly, a statement that ricocheted through the media. No Viet Cong, he pointed out, had ever called him a racial slur or oppressed his people. Why, he asked, should he go 10,000 miles away to drop bombs and bullets on brown people in Vietnam, while black people in Louisville were treated like dogs and denied simple rights? Why should he fight for a freedom abroad that he didn't fully enjoy at home? Those words and Ali's stance landed like a heavyweight punch on the American consciousness. In that era, few public figures dared to speak so boldly. Ali was risking everything, his career, his freedom, his reputation, on a principle. To the U.S. government and a large portion of the public, it was an unforgivable affront. The heavyweight champ of the world, refusing military service in wartime, it was seen by many as outright treason. Editorial pages across the country blasted him. Politicians lined up to denounce him. Even some fellow athletes turned their backs. The message from the establishment was clear: Muhammad Ali would pay dearly for his defiance. And pay he did. The hammer came down swiftly. Within hours of his draft refusal, the boxing commissions stripped Ali of his title and suspended his boxing license. The World Boxing Association took away his championship belt. All of a sudden, the most recognizable boxer alive was banned from boxing at age 25 in the prime of his life. In June 1967, he was convicted of draft evasion, a felony, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Though he remained free on appeal, and his case would wind its way upward for years, the threat of prison loomed over him. He had been effectively blackballed from the sport he loved. The boxing world moved on with new champions as Ali's appeal languished. He was exiled from his own kingdom at the very height of his powers. The cost of conscience was excruciatingly high. Yet Ali did not fade away. Barred from the ring, he fought his battles with words. He spoke at colleges and rallies, becoming a voice against the war and for black pride. To some, he became a hero standing on principle. To others, he was still a villain. But as the Vietnam War dragged on and public opinion began to shift, more people started to see courage in Ali's stance. In 1971, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously overturned his draft conviction, vindicating him at last. Legally free to resume boxing, Ali set out to regain his crown. By then, a new giant ruled the heavyweight division, a young powerhouse named George Foreman, who had destroyed Joe Frazier to become champion and was considered just as unbeatable as Liston had been. Once again, the experts said Ali stood no chance. And once again, he set out to prove them wrong. In October 1974, a decade after the Liston fight, Muhammad Ali faced Foreman in the famed Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire, Africa, employing a daring strategy later called the rope-a-dope, letting Foreman punch himself out by absorbing blows on the ropes. Ali shocked the world by knocking out the mighty George Foreman in the 8th round. The undefeated monster fell to the canvas, exhausted and beaten. When Foreman couldn't get up by the count of 10, Muhammad Ali had reclaimed the heavyweight title. 10 years after upsetting Liston, he had done the impossible yet again. This second triumph was different. The world that once sneered was now cheering. In that moment, those who had doubted Ali for so long had to confront the unmistakable truth of his greatness. Looking back on Ali's journey, the irony is stark. The very things that many hated him for in the beginning, his boldness, his unapologetic pride, his refusal to be what others wanted him to be, became the very things that people eventually admired most. History had been forced to eat its words about Cassius Clay, now Muhammad Ali. The laughter and scorn that trailed him early on had long since transformed into respect and awe. He had redefined what it meant to be a champion, a black man, and an American hero. By the time he lit the Olympic torch in 1996 with trembling hands, the nation that once vilified him stood united in admiration. Time has a way of catching up with the truth, and the truth was that Muhammad Ali had stood on the right side of history. In the end, it was never the applause that defined him. It was the defiance. It was that fearless voice that spoke up when silence was the safe choice. It was the principle that he clung to when glory and riches were stripped away. It was the way he transformed every doubt and every slight into fuel for one of the most extraordinary lives of the 20th century. Even as his body paid the price for those battles, the slowed speech, the shaking hands of Parkinson's in his later years, his spirit remained unbroken. Ali became, in his retirement, an ambassador for peace and goodwill, celebrated worldwide as the greatest. The loudmouth kid from Louisville had become a wise elder statesman beloved by those who once cursed his name. His story is the ultimate proof that sometimes, when the world laughs at your audacity, the greatest revenge is to shake up the world with your triumphs. They laughed at Muhammad Ali until he proved that a black man with a voice and a vision could shake the whole world to its core. And in doing so, he taught generations to come what it truly means to fight for who you are.